If somebody is starting from scratch, what are the traits, skill sets that they should be cultivating in order to up the odds of their success?
They should focus on one thing in general rather than lots of different things that you're not sure about. Because if you're starting out, everything looks like an opportunity. So correct answer is all of them are opportunities, but all of them won't work unless you pick one. So boom, you pick one. And then from there, I always say 6 figures is sell something to someone. That's it. And if you want more detail, sell something to someone. So it's one avatar, one product, one channel. You don't have to figure out, just pick one channel, one media source, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Consistently start going on that, whether that's cold outbound, whether that's content, whatever it is, and start reaching out to people there to start selling your stuff. You have to learn how to advertise, which I define as the process of making known. So you have to advertise. There's 6 ways to do it. And then once people engage with whatever advertisement you have, advertising is the first skill, selling them is the second skill. Product would be the third skill, which is the thing that you're ultimately advertising and selling.
That gets to 6 figures. What gets to 7?
Doing the same thing consistently. So usually once people do it in the beginning, they're sporadic, they're not consistent with it, usually gets people to 100,000 a month, which sounds crazy to probably people listening, but most people who think that's crazy also haven't done it consistently for an extended period of time. And so I use something that I call the rule of 100, which is 100 primary actions, whether that's 100 minutes of content creation per day, 100 reach outs per day. You have to pick one of them, but 100 per day. You do that for 100 days, and I promise you'll be making 6 figures if you do that.
Need motivation?
Watch a top 10 with Believe Nation.
Hey, it's Evan Carmichael, and I make these videos because in my first business, I was making $300 a month. I quit on my business partner, and the thing that saved me was studying the stories of super successful entrepreneurs. So I hope that this story today helps give you the motivation you need, because I still need it too myself. So today, let's learn from one of the best, Alex Hormozi, and my take on his top 10 rules of success. Enjoy. Rule number 2, start small.
To get started, you have to sell something to someone. That's it. Like literally, that's all. One avatar, one product, one channel. That's it. So you have one way of getting customers. You sell one thing to one specific type of person. That is all you need to do to get to 6 figures. To get to 7 figures, you need to learn how to do those 3 things, reliably, consistently, right? So you know how to sell one product to one avatar and one channel in a consistent manner. So you start having predictive metrics on how you can acquire customers. So it's either I spend this amount of money on advertising, and this is how many calls I get booked, and then from that many calls I get that many sales, etc. If it's outbound, it's like I send this many emails or make this many calls or this many texts, and then this many reply back, this many schedule, this many show, this many close, etc. If you're running organic, it's I know that I need to have this many posts that I have to make across these different channels with call to actions that drive towards this page. For every 1,000 visitors on this page, I get Y opt-ins. You know what I mean? So each of these vehicles, or I have to hit my email list, once a week. And if I hit it once a week with a call to action again. So all these are the different ways you can get customers. You could also do affiliates, you can do referrals. There's many ways to do it. But the point is that you pick one avatar, one channel, and one product. And then as soon as you can start predicting how many inputs it takes to get an output, then you get to 1 million, right? And at that point, you're at 1, 2, 3 million-ish a year. 1 to 3, you have to build out your core team. So that's usually like the first 5 hires, first 5 to 10-ish that are, it depends on the ticket of the thing that's being sold. If you're selling $25,000 things versus $500 things, the team size is going to be different. But it's the core team at about 3 million. And that's the reason that we take companies on at 3 is usually because there's a core team, and at 3 million, there's product market fit. So they've demonstrated that people want this thing, and they have enough support that we can take them from 3 to 10. 3 to 10, and this is interesting because this is a mistake a lot of people make at 3, and I can stop whenever you want me to cut the lines of the problems that come up. But the problems that come up at 3-ish are that people start getting cute, right? And they start saying, and here's what's difficult is that you get reinforced on the fact that the more you market, the more you sell, the more money you make, right? And it's true. And you can scale from there by doing more sales and more marketing. And that is what the vast majority of the industry will do because they got reinforced doing it early. The problem is that they switch the objectives. The objective of the first phase of business, which for me is like 0 to 3, is just to demonstrate product market fit and an acquisition channel that is profitable. That is the objective. Now, at this point, we transition objectives to increasing lifetime value per customer. So this is improving the customer experience, putting data tracking in place. If there's an ascension opportunity that makes sense, we need to build out that product or service line so that, and this is the big point, so that when we do choose to add another channel or expand on our current channel, we can do so more profitably, right? Where if you just sell a single product that might not have as much LTV as you would want, as you scale or put more in, your margins begin to compress. So you might go up to 10 million, but your margins have compressed over time. And then you get in this place where you have to keep selling to maintain your overhead. but you're not really taking enough home, and you can't have enough free cash flow to grow the business. And so sometimes it's like you have to take the step back, fix the product, fix the customer experience, fix the service, fix the data, fix the infrastructure that everything's built on, probably hire and fire some people that you promoted a little bit too early that didn't have the experience because they're actually not running things that well. And then once we fix that stuff, then honestly, going from 3 to 10 usually almost happens on its own. Once we're at 10, then we go far more aggressively on the acquisition side, which is, the easiest moniker that I use is more, better, new. So we do more what we're currently doing until we max that out. And then we do better of what we're currently doing. Is there any CRO opportunities? So conversion rate optimization. Can we switch this headline out? Can we change this lead magnet? Can we implement some of the best practices that we know to get, more people to show up if it's a service business, if it's a products business? Now, I only focus on service businesses, so lots of our stuff is over the phone. Can we change the video sales letters and the follow-up emails, things like that? All the improvements that can happen. And then different is, okay, or new is, can we add a new channel to this? So we have 6 that we can choose from to get new customers. We can hit up our own lists. We can do cold outbound. We can do content. We can do paid ads. We can do affiliates, and we can do referrals. And so those are the only 6 ways to get new customers. And we look at those 6 and say, of the skills that we currently have, which of these would make the most sense to add to it? And you can even go adding a new thing within a current. So if you're running paid ads, it's like going from Facebook to YouTube or going from Facebook to TikTok. And so there's, each one of those 6 squares has channels or media channels that you can, or platforms that you can tap into that give you new audiences. So that was a little bit of a crash course there, but that's what allows you to scale from 10 to 30 and beyond. At 30-ish, the founders typically will start feeling constrained because they are the juju behind the entire business.
Rule number 3, be consistent.
You are not successful in my eyes because whenever you see some outcome, you stop the activities, which means you don't have the trait of consistency. I was like, the reason you aren't where you want to be is because you can't do things repeatedly. And so most people can't do one thing over and over again. You need to be able to do the doing without seeing the result of your doing. And you have to keep doing it. And if you can keep doing things independent, and this is both ways, if it goes really well, you keep doing the thing that got you there. And if it's not going well, yet, you keep doing the thing so that you get good enough that one day it will. And that's the shift that most people don't make. And I think that's why most people just stay poor. And the reality is that if you can commit to the actions and the behaviors and the traits that you will grow through doing, then at the end of this process, a decade later, you will be the type of person who can do something for a long period of time and wait. And I promise you that if you have that trait, money will never be a constraint in your life. And this is from Atomic Habits. Every winner and every loser have the same goals. So when you measure yourself by having this external thing, and people are like, set goals. Everyone wants to be rich. Everyone wants to have a 6-pack. Your goals don't make you unique. It's the activities that you do that make you unique. The goal of the winner is to commit to the activities. The goal of the loser is to commit to the goal. 52% of 18-year-olds, high school seniors, think they're going to be millionaires by 25. The world is going to be shook. Many of you will fail. And that's because most of you have the same goal. 52% you think you're going to be a millionaire, right? That's just the math. But only a small percentage will, because if you want to be a millionaire, you're not going to focus on making $1 million. You're going to focus on the stuff that makes $1 million. And so when you can divorce the activities from the outcome, then you can focus on the doing, which whether your income does this over that period of time, your self-esteem remains the same because you're committing to what you can control. If you can make that shift, it will change your life. So I started making podcasts 6 years ago. I committed to that process. When I signed on with a YouTube vendor a few years ago, on the first call, I said, I'd like to have this channel be something in 5 to 10 years. I was like, we'll look at it then and see if it was worth continuing to do. I was like, but I'm in for a decade. And he stopped me afterwards. He was like, I've literally never had a client say that to me, ever. He's like, they're all like, how can I get leads in the first 90 days from YouTube? And like, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, if we're making progress, I'm good. I will commit to that. I think that if you can think that way, you will get what you want. And then people will ask you a decade from now, man, how did you have this overnight success and blah, 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 blah. And aren't you like, don't the followers and the fans, like, how does it not get to your head? And you're like, because it was never the goal. And so I feel just as good at year 1 as I do at year 8, because the activities that I committed to remain the same. If you can think that way and you can shift your perspective, it'll decrease your emotional ups and downs. And I think we all need ways to decrease our emotional ups and downs in the game of business, because like we need to have second lives and third lives and fourth lives. And the way to do that is to not put your life, your game playing life, in something that you can't control, but putting all your game playing life in the things you can.
Rule number 4, reframe your thinking.
for me, a very core belief that has been, I think, intrinsic to at least the material success that we've experienced has been a belief that meaning is self-ascribed. So that there is no inherent meaning in the things that we do, or the actions we take, or the outcomes that happen, but only that which we ascribe to it. And so because of that, I feel like it's allowed me, to the point of what you were saying about like the amount of pain and the amount of suffering that you have to go through in order to achieve the things on the other side. I think it's allowed me to reframe a lot of the discomfort into, what if this just is how it always has been? Or what if this is actually amazing? And what if this is exactly what it should look like? And so I think a lot of times it's the discrepancy between our expectations and reality that shape the emotions that we have in response to any given situation, bad, good, etc. And so I think a lot of people can't control their state. And we deal with this with a lot of the portfolio companies. It's funny because I don't even necessarily want to get in this. I want to talk about like the business and what's the strategy and how we're going to execute the stuff. But there's a big percentage of time where they're stressed and they think there's something wrong with that. And so I feel like a lot of people feel like there's something wrong with experiencing human emotions. And so they are stressed and then think there's something wrong with them, or they are sad. And I know that this is the thing that the keyboards are, the fingers are right on top of it. It's my belief. It is contrarian. I accept that it's the beliefs we have about our emotions that are the things that drive us mad.
Facts.
And so somebody's sad, and then they tell themselves that they're bad because they're sad, or they're wrong to be sad, or they're a piece of shit because they're sad, rather than saying, isn't this a beautiful thought about the human existence? Like, if I could not be sad, then I would not experience joy. So like, if I say that I don't want to be sad anymore, then I would also have to give up joy. Am I willing to do that? No. Well, then this is just a part. Like, I can't say that I want sunny days if there are no rainy days. Like, we don't say weather is good or bad, it just is. And so I think to the same degree, the human experience is also that way too, at least how I define it. And so I think having that as my backbone frame in terms of my worldview, although contrarian, has helped me a lot in dealing with the things that often derail entrepreneurs on their path to getting what they want. And so for me, that's been very helpful. So from a contrarian standpoint of like belief, Peter Thiel's question, like what closely held beliefs do you have that most people don't agree with? That's one of them.
Also, to make sure you're actually taking action after watching this video, I've designed a special free worksheet just for this video. The worksheet will highlight all of the lessons learned in this video, as well as pull out our 3 favorite learnings and quotes that will inspire you to actually do something. The worksheet will also give you space to write down what your key takeaways are and your specific plan of action to make sure you're getting results. If you want the worksheet designed specifically for this video, absolutely for free, there's a link in the description below. Go click on it and start building the momentum in your life and your business. I'll see you there. Rule number 5, learn to assess yourself.
The biggest issue that most people have is they don't have the ability to discern what their missing link is or what their next step is. If you think about the theory of constraints, which is that a system will grow until it's constrained. And so what happens is most people add potential to a system, but they don't actually increase the throughput of the system. So for example, if I had a bridge, right, and it has a weak link in the bridge, or let's say a chain is probably simpler. So if you have a chain and you have to pull 2 things, the amount of force that you can put on the chain is just predicated based on the weakest link. And so what happens is that people reinforce a strong link and not the weak link in the chain. And so they add potential to the chain, but they don't actually add any more strength that can be pulled. And so if you think about the amount of money that you're trying to make as amount of money that you're literally trying to pull towards you, that weak link is going to be the skill deficiency that you have. And so most people solve problems that aren't really there. And they spend a lot of their time reinforcing skills that they enjoy, but that's not their deficiency. And so that's why like the entrepreneurship thing is you have to be a jack of all trades, master of none. You have to be good enough to get the thing across the finish line to pull the money towards you. You don't have to have the strongest link. You just need all of the links to be strong enough. And so I think most people aren't good at assessing their own deficiencies. And so if the follow-up question is, how do you assess deficiencies, right? How do you know what's missing? The question is, what are the revenue generating activities within a business? How can I get myself closer to those revenue generating activities? And so you can look at product as a revenue generating activity. You can look at sales as a revenue generating activity. You can look at marketing as a revenue generating activity. And so if you think about those as kind of the 3 core pillars of what businessing is, and then you have back of house, right? You've got finance, you've got IT, you've got the other pieces. But the people who ascend even in the back office know how to generate revenue and bottom line for their division. So for example, my CFO, Suzanne Chiflett, She she led a $15 billion acquisition, $5 billion, a $1 billion. The last company she was at was $750 million. She's been $1 to $100 million 2 times. So like she's been there. And the first thing she did on our first interview, she was like, "Oh, you won't have to pay for me." I was like, and she's paid very well. And she's like, "You don't have to pay for me." She's like, I'll save more than what you're ever going to pay me. Just first 6 months, I'll save you that. And I was like, oh, cool. And so smart people know how to do that. Like an intelligent, video editor is going to come and say, dude, I can 10x the amount of views that you're getting on this thing, because he's going to tie himself to marketing. A good product person is going to say, I can decrease our churn, which is going to increase your LTV. I'm going to be able to get more people to ascend because they have a higher NPS score and they're more likely to want to keep buying from us. So they have to just figure out a way to tie whatever the thing, if they're really passionate about something, by all means, go all in on it. If you're IT, then you're thinking, how can I decrease page load times? How can I get conversion rates up? You start getting into the CRO side. How can I organize the data in such a way that the CEO can make better decisions? And we have real-time reporting against all the sales guys so we can optimize our funnels towards the best converting guys, right? All aspects of the business can make more money, but people don't think about it through that lens. So the first thing is, how do I tie what I do every day to making more money in the business? You connect that dot and then you improve that connection.
Rule number 6, avoid stress.
I get asked about mindset a lot on podcasts. They're like, when you're building a business or you're building your career, there are stressors that come into play. How we manage the circumstances or the conditions that come to us dictates how our life turns out. Everybody has bad stuff happen. You probably believed and nodded your head like, yeah, everyone has stuff happen. And then we choose to make it bad or good. Imagine for a second, 2 children that are playing. One child tells the other child, your nose is really big, or you're fat. Interesting is that the child who hears it is unaffected and the child who says it is unaffected. They're like, you're fat. And he's like, huh. Parent comes in and overhears it. And she's like, oh my God. Takes the child that was called fat, comforts them, gives them the expectation that they should be upset, and then tells the other one that that was bad. And in a moment, there was something that is now traumatic that otherwise wouldn't have been. And so when we're kids, we walk into the world with no meaning. All we do is we observe. And then whatever the adults around us tell us and say, this means that, we take as fact. And it's not true. It's their interpretation of the world and we inherit them. And then we spend the rest of our life trying to undo and examine these beliefs that we have been told by people that we probably don't agree with. When something bothers you, pull it out and look at it and say, what happened and why is this bad? And what would it look like if it were good? And so the 2 tools that I use are time and volume. The volume example is thinking, okay, I'm in traffic. If this happened every day, would I be upset? If it happened every day, I'd probably expect it, which means that I would not be upset about it because it's just how things always are. If you want to make it positive, you say, well, what if every time I got in a car, normally it would take an hour and today it took 30? I'd be pretty excited about it. And so all we did is just change the volume on the circumstance to recalibrate the meaning that we're choosing to ascribe to it, good or bad. I like to think of circumstances a lot like weather, which is like you've got sunny days and you've got rainy days. And the problem, in my opinion, is that people, any day that it rains, they say is bad, and any day that's sunny, they say is good, when in reality, it just is. It's just the weather. Contrast is what create the quote good and bad, when in reality there's just a middle line and half of it's above and half of it's below. Then what we can do is artificially move the line in our minds by saying whatever this circumstance is, what would it look like if it were worse? And what would it look like if it were worse all the time? And if so, then maybe today's a good thing. The second frame that I like to use is time. 100 years out, but 10,000 years out, how much is this going to matter? The reason something affects you is because you have deemed it meaningful. You've said it matters. It's my worldview that nothing matters with a capital M. Like nothing matters in the universe. It doesn't matter. There's this statue of a head that's in the sands of Egypt. All right, and it's bigger than this whole room. And it's just the head. And it's worn out. And then inscripted along the forehead, it says, here lies, crazy name, who owned everything that the eye could see, the immortal so-and-so. And the only thing that was left was a worn out statue head that no one knew who he was. And it was 5,000 years old. If that guy who ruled the known world, to him, wealth probably mattered, right? But does it matter? No, probably not. I've relieved a lot of the pressure in my life so that I could make better decisions by zooming way out and thinking 10,000 years from now, will this matter? And if the answer is no, does it matter to me? And then if I can make the decision of like good or bad based on my new context that I created, then I can live life a lot easier. And so for me, that helped me decrease anxiety. It helped me decrease sadness around certain circumstances. And I'll give you the last example of this. So I had a cat named Bill, Chill Bill, rest in peace. Homie, love the cat. He died, it's like some freak heart thing or something. So he died in like 2 years. When he died, I was bummed. I was like, this sucks. But then I thought to myself, what if cats only normally lived 6 months? How stoked would I be that he lived 4 times the normal length of a normal cat? I was like, I'd probably be really stoked. I'd be like, dude, he lived a long life. I can't believe we had him this long. And all of a sudden, my perspective around the death completely changed. I was like, I was so grateful that I got to have him as long as I did. When you play with time and you play with volume, first off, we have to be aware of the levers of meaning that exist. And then once you're aware of them, you can start moving them in your favor and then looking at your current conditions through different lenses and say, what would this mean if it were amazing? What would the conditions have to be in order for this to be an awesome thing? And then all of a sudden, you just exit the game of happy, sad, and get to be your own game maker. At least that's what I try to do when I get upset. Look at it, pull it apart, think like, is this real? Is this true?
Rule number 7, improve your decision.
The thing is your decision-making process is ultimately the most valuable thing that you have, right? It's what makes you, it's your picker, right? It makes you decide what way to go, who you're gonna marry, what business opportunity you're gonna pursue, how you're gonna price, how you're gonna start marketing, what you're gonna learn first, who you're gonna, get mentoring from, all of these things, who you're gonna become friends with. Like, all of these are decisions, right? And you can take the money away from a billionaire and then they can recreate it again. Elon Musk, lost it and then gained it all back, right? And so the thing is the decision making is what ultimately fuels all these things. And the hardest part about entrepreneurship, and really, I think almost life in general, is that you can make the right decision and have the wrong outcome. And I think, and let me give you a couple examples of this. So, for example, you may say, you know what? I listen to Warren Buffett. I think he's a good investor, and so he says, I wouldn't touch Bitcoin, right? And I hear that, and I'm like, man, well, he knows a little bit more about it than I do. But his argument was simple. It is speculative, which means I'm buying it not because it has intrinsic value, but only because I believe that someone else will buy it for more later, right? That's all it is. He only believes in investing in things that have intrinsic value and also produce, right? So they actually have production. So like a business you buy, you still own the business at the end, and then it spits out production, which would be profit or crops or whatever, right? And so that's the basic difference, right? And so the thing is that you can make the right decision. So for example, I chose not to buy Bitcoin 2 years ago or whatever, and now the amount of money that it would have been worth is a lot more. Was the decision wrong, or was it that the outcome did not match the quality of the decision? And so let me explain, let me unpack this. If you are going to change the way you make decisions because a decision that you made in the past that was probably a good decision ended up bad, you have to apply the same decision-making context or framework to everything else. All right, so let me explain. So if I say I'm now going to be a speculator, right? I'm going to be someone who buys things with the hopes of selling them later for more, even though the thing itself doesn't have more value, right? If I choose to start making those types of decisions, then I have to think about all the other investments I would have made and lost money on as a result of that decision-making framework. And the place that I heard this first was Ray Dalio in Principles. So he's one of the richest men in the world, an investor as well. And he said, one of the hardest things is passing up on an opportunity and then seeing it, do really, really well, right? He's like, but the thing is I have to think to myself, if I were to use the decision-making framework that would have made that deal a winner, then I'd have to apply that same framework to all of these other businesses or situations that would have been losers. And my net of having that different decision-making framework would ultimately cause me to lose. And so this has been one of the most powerful concepts for me as an entrepreneur, because what it does is it allows me to separate the outcome from the quality of the decision. Why was it that I did these things, right? And I can't even tell you, so for example, actually I won't give that one, but there are decisions that I made when I was younger that ended up being, poor later. But when I thought back about why I made the decision, I would make the same decision today. So it's not fair for me to say, well, I wouldn't have made the same call now. But you can't use the information that you have today to make the decision that you would have made in the past, because then it means that you were a different person because you're not using information that you have access to, right? And so claiming that this decision that I did in the past that didn't end up well, working out in my favor, was the wrong call can just be really poisonous, and it may not be true. Now, if you make a mistake because you had poor calculations and you repeat the same mistake over and over again, then you should consider looking at your decision-making calculus and see if you need to tweak some things, right? But for me, this has been one of the hardest learned lessons and emotionally one of the most trying is looking at decisions I've made, looking at the outcome and being able to separate, was this a good decision independent of the outcome? And I'll wrap this up with just a quick example to show you. If you had a perfect baseball swing, right? You're just an amazing, batter, right? If someone gets up there and they're the best batter in the world and they strike out, is it because their swing is horrible? Is it because they don't have the right decision making about how they swing at pitches or how they pick the pitches? Probably not. He's probably a really good batter, right? Because I just said he's the best. But it still means he's going to strike out, and it still means he's going to get out and hit pop flies and all that kind of stuff. But he's going to be an amazing batter with a 350 average or whatever, and still 2 out of 3 times he's going to strike out or basically, not get on base, get out. And so when I think about that, like you can be the best at this thing and still only be right a certain percentage of the time, right? And so rather than that batter striking out once and saying, I need to change my swing, and then getting back up there and striking out again and be like, I need to change my swing, and always resetting the baseline, instead being like, I understand that if I apply this swing to enough at-bats, quite literally, I will get the opportunity to knock it out of the park. And me knocking out of the park on one of these right decisions will ultimately outweigh the negatives of the wrongs that I have done.
Rule number 8, find true happiness.
I think a lot of my definitions have been defined by my actions. And so I am the person who has done these things, and I will do things that will get me closer to the things that I want to achieve. And so a lot of my definition of self has always been based on evidence. And so I think it was harder for me in the beginning because I didn't have evidence to support what I hoped to be true about myself, which at the time wasn't. And so
what did you hope to be true? That you could figure it out, or was it always a result that you associated it to?
I mean, it was, I want to make more money than my dad. You know what I mean? That was the thing, for me. And that was all I needed. You know what I mean? I remember thinking in college, because you're young in college and it's like, be happy and all that stuff. And I just remember being like, happiness. And that was like a moment for me. I was like, happiness. I don't care about happiness. I want to do this.
Why didn't you care about happiness? That's very counterintuitive even now, super counterintuitive at that age.
Yeah. Because I was obsessed with how not happy I was. And so
so the things you were doing that weren't designed to make you happy, that's what's weird.
So I was so obsessed with like positive psychology, and I was reading all these stuff and watching these TED Talks. I remember this whole period of my life. And I was constantly assessing my mood as a determination of whether I was happy or not. And it became so obsessive that I was just like, all of this. I was like, I'm just going to do shit. And that's all. I was like, I'm just going to do shit, and hopefully it works out. And
did you ever define what works out means? If it isn't happiness,
be less unhappy, I would say, was my thought process, which was like, I'm just going to do the things. And so I shifted from a lot of introspection, internal mood regulation and thinking and stuff. And I think a lot of the reason that I have the worldviews I have about, emotions and whatnot have come from this kind of initial experience. So it's like I had that, and then I just started working, and then I found myself actually looking up after, a decent period of time, being like, I haven't thought about happiness in a long time, and I think I might be. And so I also don't really like the word happiness because it's circumstantial versus joy, but like I experience joy significantly more now than I did then when I was younger. And I think it's partially because like you can be mournful and joyful at the same time. Imagine someone like, it's like an appreciation of the human experience. Like, this is terrible, but even in the suffering, there's beauty in that. You know what I mean? Because it's purely human.
Yeah.
And so I think it was disconnecting.
It's interesting that it matters to me as well, but I've never had to articulate it. What is the connection to like the human experience that is so valuable that it's joyful even in mourning?
I think it's just understanding both sides of the coin. I feel so if there's few things that I believe, it is that like right now there's things in my life that I don't like that I wish were better, and there are things in my life that I really like, and 10 years ago it was the same way, and 10 years from now it'll be the same way. And when I die, there will be stuff that I will not have accomplished that I will wish I had, and there will be things that I wish I had done better that I will not have done, and there will be things that I have done that I am proud of. And so like those things are not going to change. And so if the only thing this sounds hopefully not overly trite, but it's like all I can do is just enjoy the game. And it took me a really long time to get there. Like, it took me a really long time to get there. Or at least it felt that way. Or at least it felt like I suffered a lot on that process, which is why I have a heart for people who are like, dude, I'm super sad, I'm super depressed, whatever it is. And it's because I judged myself so much on not being happy all the time because I thought there was something wrong with the fact that I wasn't happy, that I drove myself insane not being happy, rather than just being like, you know what, maybe I'm just gonna do the stuff and just happiness for a minute. And so I think it's like when we have these, like, am I happy, am I not happy? I think my opinion is that you have to rise above it so that you can just see, you can feel the spectrum, which is just being present. Because I think, again, Alex's 2 cents, haven't been around that long. If you are present, you're present. Like, most people aren't present ever. And so it's like, if I can just be present, even in my suffering, I'm there, right? Then I can experience joy for being human and having this experience that I only get once. And the biggest frame shift that I've had in terms of my experience of living has been, it sounds weird, but it's something I'll call the grandfather frame, which is I learned how to become apathetic, right? Because that took me time to stop feeling pain.
Rule number 9, transfer skills.
Once you cross, like, getting from $1 million to 3 million is very difficult, because you have to learn an entirely new skill set, which is like, you have to hire your first team, right? And that's very difficult for a lot of people. 3 to 10 is difficult because you have to unlearn the thing that made you successful up to this point, which is you're focusing on front end rather than on product and back end. And so that becomes, it's very difficult. It's like spiritually difficult at that point. You know what I mean? Once you're at 3 to 10, you're already out of the, like, I have to cry my face off in terms of like hours in, because at some point the amount of work that has to get done surpasses your ability to work, which means you have to work through other people. At 10 million, the difficulty is you have to give up even more control. And so at each of these levels, you're giving up different types of control. In the beginning, you're giving up control of fulfillment. The next level, you're giving up control of sales. Then you're giving up control of finances, things like that. Then you're giving up control of marketing. Then you're giving up control of managing all those things. Then you're giving up control of leading, the company, and so on and so forth. So, like, there's always this relinquishing of control, which is, I would say, spiritually very difficult. And it's easy to say, very hard to do. And that's what we look for in the portfolio companies that we're thinking about taking on. We look at the CEOs and we're like, do I think this person has the humility to give up control when it is required?
And rule number 10, the last one before some very special bonus clips, is live with gratitude.
Recently, I've been trying to toy with one that would create gratitude. There's a clip that went pretty viral not that long ago. It's also my number 1 tweet of all time, which is, when I was 20, I wanted to be a millionaire. Now that I'm a millionaire, I want to be 20. When I'm 85 years old, and in my mind, I imagine I will be a multi-billionaire at that point, I know that I would give up everything that I have of material wealth just to be poor and 20 again. I call this the frame of the grandfather, or the grandfather frame. And it works like this. If you've ever looked at pictures from your past, and you look at where you grew up, or you look at, your old room, or you look at a picture of you with old friends doing something, we tend to feel these feelings of nostalgia. And I tried to quantify, like, what is nostalgia? So to me, nostalgia is gratitude in the present for past circumstances. For whatever reason, we're able to kind of look past all of the kind of minutia of how we were feeling, our moods, and we're able to kind of like see big picture, the things that we are grateful for. Take a pause here. I'm sure all of us have tons of childhood and things that we wish were different and blah, 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 blah. But there are still elements of our past, our childhood, our adolescence, our teenage years, our college years, whatever it is, right? Where you feel grateful. Some of you guys are superstars and are always grateful for everything, and I'm jelly. I don't roll that way. It's not like I wake up and I'm like, man, I just want to count my lucky stars. Like, I just don't, that's just not how I function. And I've been trying this on, and I hope you do too, because it's been really like improving my life. I tried to do this. I wake up thinking to myself, if I were 85 years old, and I got to go through a time machine and be back in my body as I am now to experience my life from my 85-year-old self, seeing it again. If I wake up and I feel my body and I'm like, this is so nice. I don't have all the joint pain. My wrists don't have arthritis. And then I wake up and I'm like, I remember when we used to live here. Even when I looked at Leila this morning, I was thinking to myself, man,
Like, this is my wife right at the beginning of our marriage. We're only 6 years in. We wake up and we walk over to have our coffee in the morning, which we always do. And I'm like, isn't this so nice? I remember when we used to have coffee here together. This is great. And I look out the window. Look how young Vegas looks. It doesn't have all these buildings and these flying cars like it does now. It's so underdeveloped compared to what it is today. And I feel gratitude for an external just environment, which I would never really think that. But I know that my 85-year-old self will totally appreciate those things. And as I'm going through the day, applying that frame also to business, where I can see the CEOs of our companies and the people that work within our holding company at acquisition.com, they're stressed about things. And in my mind, I'm thinking, isn't this cool that we get to do this together? Isn't that fun? Isn't that neat? Look how cute that is. It is the most powerful frame that I've encountered. I think the reason it's so powerful is, one, it operates almost entirely from a frame of gratitude that for me, I can feel. For whatever reason, gratitude journals, the meditations, things like that, I don't feel that. But thinking about my 85-year-old self being able to re-experience life through my 32-year-old body, it's really shifted how I see things. And also decreases the amount of anxiety and stress I have over outcomes, because I'm like, this isn't gonna matter in the long run. I also think it helps from a business, the term loosely, but like a business wisdom perspective, because when you think about the decisions, you think about it within the larger context of your life, and you're not like, oh yeah, I'm gonna make that short-term dollars, because you're like, I'm 85. I don't have anything to prove. You know what I mean? If you think about the really stressful things that you've had happen in your past, I feel nostalgia for the sleeping on the floor that I did at my gyms, for how tired I used to be at the end of the day of taking 20 plus consults for months and months and months on end. And rather than feeling stressed about it or resenting the fact that I have to do it, I get to do this. I get to make videos talking to a camera. Look at my 32-year-old self go, trying to make his content, trying to help other entrepreneurs. Isn't that cool? If I had to characterize seasons of my life, I would say I was very angry as a teenager and young adult. And then I went from angry to being aware of the deficit between where I was and what I considered to be happiness. From there, I kind of switched to what I have affectionately called the happiness mantra, which I lived for a very long period of time, which was I stopped trying to optimize for happiness at all and just really stopped thinking about it altogether, which I think moved me closer to something that I would consider to be joy. You can be joyful independent of circumstance, because joy is from within. Happiness tends to come from external, right? It comes from circumstance. And I think when we look at the grandparents, or at least the people that are older that I aspire to be, is they just have an internal joy. They have gratitude for being able to live it one last time. Because at the end of the day, it is our last time. I wanted to give you the simplest single hack that I have used inadvertently and seen a tremendous amount of success. That is asking myself the question, what would a person who does this type of thing do in this instance? The one that I'll tell you that I've repeated a lot to myself over the years, probably over the last 5 or 10 years, has been the repeated chorus of, what would a wise man do? I think it's because I did not consider myself to be very wise, and I acted many ways that were unwise earlier on in my life, and I still continue to do so, but I try to do less of it, right? And I think that, and I'll borrow this again from James Clear's book, your identity is much more of a weighing system. Actually, this is not from his book, but it's much more of a voting system where you cast votes in either direction based on your activities of what type of person you want to become. And I think the simplest distillation of that concept is simply asking the question, what would this type of person do? If you can use that as the refrain that you come back to over and over again, the chorus of your day that gets repeated over and over again, I think it's much easier than trying to remember the 50-point checklist of all the activities that you need to do to achieve the goal. And the friend that came back in my life, where we were having this conversation, I just distilled it down to what would a billionaire do? And so when we're confronted with these crossroads, right, you wake up in the morning and you're like, I don't know what I should start on. It's like, what would a billionaire do? And so basically what you can do is have a certain refrain or chorus that you ask yourself, what would this type of person do? And that type of person, when you ask that question, is who you will eventually become as you continue to cast votes that reinforce the stories that we tell ourselves about who we are. And those are the things that create long-lasting, deep change. And what's more about this is that these changes, when they become internal, when they become ingrained in our behavior, they become effortless, but it takes time. And so I think that the mental cue that I have given myself inadvertently over the years, I don't have a lot of choruses that I refrain to or that I come back to over and over again. And so I tweeted about one and it got shared a zillion times, but it is, what would someone 10 times smarter than me do in this situation, right? And a different way of saying that is, what would a billionaire do? And word it in whatever way that resonates with you. But I think rather than having that big checklist, you can put
just a little post-it on your computer or wherever you work that's a reminder to yourself that this is the type of person I want to become. And in order to become this type of person, I need to do these things because those actions will reinforce the thoughts that I say about myself. Because the whole concept behind affirmations that I do not like, right, which is I'm a lion, I'm a tiger, I'm a whatever, right? Just saying them doesn't make them true unless you're a crazy person. And most of us are not crazy, I think, right? There's plenty of crazy people, don't get me wrong, but if you're probably watching this channel, you're probably at least semi-sane, right? If we have, this degree of sanity that's on our side, then what we have to do is create something else, which is evidence. We have to give ourselves evidence that we are this type of person in order to become that. But how do you have evidence that you are going to be this person when you have none? Well, it starts with activity. It starts with doing the stuff. And as an added corollary, depending on the goal that you have, it might be, what would a person with a six-pack do? What would a pro champion bodybuilder do? What would an amazing husband do? Or what would the best husband in the world do? And so you can use this framework of asking the question of what your ideal self would do in any given circumstance to apply to a vast number of scenarios. So rather than trying to fix for the habit, fix for the being. And then the habits will take care of themselves in accordance with the type of person that you have stated you wish to become. And so then the goals we have becoming the person we want to be. Once we know who we want to become, then that can direct the types of activities that will be in accordance with that. And the reason I like this better too is that if we're trying to reinforce an identity or an identity trait about ourselves, this is a really good habit, I think, that I've picked up over the years. How do we behave? The reason that this is so important is that it's one thing to know where you're going, but it's another thing to know how you're going to get there. And so this is just as true in business partnerships and marriage in terms of what you want to have happen and how you want to get there as it is in business, okay? And so what I want to do is actually just walk you through the 3 values that we have at acquisition.com and why we believe them. And so from an overarching perspective, the way to come to values is to look at what are the non-negotiables, okay? And so what I mean by that is, and every company is different, because the core thing about values is that they have to be things that are true and innate to you, right? Like for example, at Southwest, have fun is one of their core values. And if someone does not want to have fun or does not believe in the processes that they do to have a good time, then that is a non-negotiable for them. That person cannot work at that company. It is a fireable offense. And so these are not aspirational. These are not things that you would like to have. These are things that are core to who you are as a person and as a team. All right. And so when you decide on these non-negotiables, they are by their very nature non-negotiable, which means that you hire based on these, you fire based on these. And these are the core spirit of the team. And some of the mistakes that I see when people make values is that, one, they don't draw the line in the sand. And so one of the core things about a value is that you have to be able to say, this is not this, right? You have to be able to say, okay, between justice and mercy, we lean towards justice, or we lean towards mercy, which means you have to repel people with your values, all right? And so if your values do not repel people, then they are not values, they are platitudes, okay? And so it's very important. The next thing is that when you're making your values, the values themselves need to be ideally said in words that you would normally say. So if you have little sayings inside of your community, then a lot of times those can become some of the values you have. So for example, at Gym Launch, one of our first portfolio companies, speed is king, do the boring work. These were different ways. I mean, we could just say work ethic, but that's not the way we would have said it. We could have said be fast or fast turnaround times, but speed is king was the way we would have said it, okay? And so some of the things that I've learned with this is also, you cannot have too many values, as in, I'll say it differently. You can have too many values. You have to be very selective at the true core values of the company. All right. And so if you're, between two, a lot of times you just have to chunk up and kind of get a broader value, but they become the core. And I think that what we have found is that 3 is the sweet spot. And that number has continued to distill down over time. But I think 3 is the amount that your human brain can comprehend as lenses to make a decision, right? And the reason these values are so important is that when you scale the company, you have to scale decision making, which means you have to scale the frame with which you duplicate the decision-making process, which is, should I hire this person even though Alex is not involved in this? Do they align with the core values? And the more stringent the values, the easier it is to have a black and white example of, I think this person meets 2 out of the 3 or 1 out of 3, but we only accept 3 out of 3. And I will tell you this as an additional point. If you have core values in the business, I would relay them to all aspects of your life. If you would not do business with someone for a decade, do not do business with them for a day. It's one of the Navalisms that I like a lot. And so if you don't want to deal with this client for a decade, don't deal with them for a day. If you wouldn't deal with this employee for a decade, don't deal with them for a day. You have to, and the extent to which you hold your line of intolerance around these truly non-negotiables will dictate the health of the organization. And if you make these non-negotiables and realize that there are people in your organization, in your client base, that do not ascribe to these, then you must make the changes to fix it. And that is the pruning of the tree that will ultimately grow the tree. All right. These are the short-term pains for the long-term gains.
There are a lot of different things that come up in the business world where I will see people conflate or mistake what thing they are solving, right? And most times when I'm talking to a newer entrepreneur or even a more established entrepreneur and they reach out for help or guidance or whatever, right? Or it's one of our portfolio companies, most times they'll start talking, right, really fast about all this stuff to try and provide context. And I'll just usually pause them and be like, what problem are we solving? It usually gets them to stop, right? And I would highly advise you, if you have subordinates or you have direct reports who roll into you and they have a whole bunch of decisions, a lot of times it can get caught, and sometimes ourselves too, we can get caught in the day-to-day, the minutia, and just simply pause and say, what problem are we solving? There's so many pieces of this that I want to unpack that I think are going to be really interesting for you. But the first one is, when you define what problems you are solving, you may even have to ask the question, is there a problem? When some people are like, well, hey, we're getting, customer service complaints. It's like, okay, understood. Is this something that we believe that we can reasonably eliminate? Is this something that is catastrophic to the business, or is this something that we can kind of try and improve over time, through systems and process, right? And so a lot of times people misprioritize problems because they perceive them as threats to existence, when in reality they are a course of doing business and things that we can consistently improve, right? Especially if you're newer. You're starting out, of course your product's not going to be perfect yet, right? You're just getting going. But you improve these things rather than thinking I have to stop everything to fix this problem, right? And so the first frame shift is that most people think in terms of like, I have a problem to solve rather than a dichotomy to be managed, as in these are two things that will always exist. All right, I'll give you a different example of this. Actually, this will be a fun one. The reason we will probably never have people who are all happy about a tax code is because you cannot have both fairness and equality. Equality means everyone pays 10%. Fairness means the rich people pay more than the poor people. That's fair. This is equal. Both are ideals. And yet, somehow they're not the same thing. And yet both are right. And so because of that, we will always have this conflict. It's the same thing between justice and mercy. Both of them are ideals. Both of them are right. And yet somehow they're conflicting. And so we see these situations, and this is why I'm trying to hopefully give this to you, because the more I started to recognize these patterns, the more quickly I could recognize them and then identify them and then either dismiss them or say, oh, it's another one of those, right? It's a pattern recognition. It's like, oh, you guys are spending all this effort trying to solve a problem that is unsolvable. This is a dichotomy that must be managed and will never be eliminated. And so I think my goal with this video is if I can help you get out of these little mental hamster wheels, it's been incredibly valuable for me. All right. So that's the dichotomy. That's like one of the things that people will mistake. They'll mistake a dichotomy for a problem that needs to be solved. All right. Another framework that I find immensely valuable is the concept of a continuum versus a binary. All right. This is probably one of the biggest mental errors that people make when they're trying to identify things. And this is what I mean by that. So, for example, I might say, I'll use a weight loss example. So people will say something like, I am off my diet or I'm on my diet, right? It's a very simple thing. And that's because psychologically we like to be binary. We like to label things as yes or no. But biology and reality exist on continuums, as in, to what extent did you go off of your diet, right? Did you go 200 calories over? Did you go 500 calories over? And even though it is, quote, more difficult to think in this way, it is also more accurate. And so our brain uses binaries as placeholders for decision-making to store data, right? When in reality, when you start storing all these binary decisions, they start adding up and you start getting more and more inaccurate, if that's a word, on your decision-making process, because you're actually basing your decisions not on facts, but based on binary shorthand that your brain saves. And so that is one of the biggest mistakes that I see all the time in thinking in entrepreneurs and really in anything in general, because we like to have that shorthand. It is easier, right? It's easier to say, I fell off my diet, or
I am diabetic, when the reality is not whether you are diabetic, it's how diabetic are you, right? Kind of interesting. I stole that from Dr. Cashy, but I just love that. Who's my closest friend? He's a biochemist, and we talk about this stuff all the time. Point being, if you can think about this within, I'll give you a business example. So if we have a binary where people are saying yes or no, which is, let's say, Facebook doesn't work. Marketing doesn't work. I hear these statements all the time, and you may laugh at this, right? But I get DMs like this all the time. Facebook doesn't work for me. Marketing doesn't work for me. Like, you can't sell this way in my business, right? And so people want to shorten a problem into yes, it works, no, it doesn't work, when so much of business and problem solving is understanding the nuance between where we're starting and where we're going. And it's to what extent has Facebook not worked, right? Where is the fall off? Right? It is not that it doesn't work. It is just we only got it to work this %. Right now, we need to get all the way over the hump to get there. But it's to what extent? And I think that if you can ask the right questions, if you can see the problems as they truly are, they become far more solvable. And so this has been probably, I just gave you two of my best frames that I think with all the time. All right, so I'll say these again. So the first mental lapse, I'll say, that I see all the time is mistaking a dichotomy that needs to be managed for a problem that needs to be solved. People do this in their marriages as well, right? So you look at your wife, right? You look at your wife and you're like, I need more variety, right? But later you're like, I need more consistency. And you're like, we have to figure this out. We need variety. We need consistency. It's like, yes, you need both, right? And so it's not a problem to be solved. It's a dichotomy to be managed.
I would say there are days that I feel like less energized or things like that, for sure, not about like the big picture of like, I don't believe that this cause is not worthy. But I do think a lot of people have that too, where they're like, what I'm doing is meaningless, right? And then I get into, I think everything's meaningless, and then we can just create whatever meaning, we choose to, because if we don't believe in a capital M meaning, which a lot of people disagree with, that's fine. But if you don't believe in a capital M meaning, I think that's very freeing, because then you can create a little m meaning for whatever you want. And so if you believe, you can then choose to architect your own life in whatever ways that you deem meaningful, and make the activities you do aligned with that meaning. The difference between capital M meaning and little m meaning, and this is kind of like the basis of nihilism, which people have like a very negative viewpoint around, which I'm not entirely sure about why. But like capital M meaning means that like, this is the meaning of life, period. Like for everyone, this is the meaning of life. Whereas if we say that there is no single agreed upon meaning of life, and then people say, well, then that is your big meaning of life. And I'm like, yes, you're right. I believe that there is no meaning. That is the meaning that I believe. And they're like, well, then that is the capital M. Then sure, that's my capital M meaning, is that there is no meaning. What's the implication of that? It means now that we have meaning-making machines in our brain, and so we get to create and destroy meaning as we see fit. And so if we choose an activity and we deem that goal meaningful because we think it's more interesting or it energizes us, then we can ascribe meaning to that and do more of it. And what's nice about not having capital M meaning is that can shift, right? That might be good for a season, and then it can shift. I will say that the downside of not having capital M meaning, which I consider to be religion off the shelf, is that it's more difficult because you have no one who's saying, here's the big box of rules, you can read it, and then that way you don't have to make the decisions about it. But I think it's more difficult, but ultimately more rewarding if you have reasoning behind why you believe what you believe. Because then you have to independently come up with your own conclusions about those things. It also makes it malleable so that if you get new data or new evidence, then you can change your mind, which a lot of people, again, have difficulty with. But like if you change the information, then it would make sense that if it materially changes the outcome, that the way that you believe about something should change. And I think a lot of people identify with their beliefs as a part of themselves rather than as what I prefer to call them, which is assumptions, because they work the same way. What's the difference in belief and assumption? Not a lot, right? The only difference is just what we call the word. And so assumptions are based on things that we've observed, and then we assume something as a result. And so I would say that beliefs are just assumptions, but when you call them that, they become less tied to your identity. If you have an assumption, you don't say, you challenged my assumption. It's like, well, yeah, you challenged my assumption. Oh, that's great. I was assuming this. It must be this. And then they become much more flexible, and then we don't tie our egos into them, and I think ultimately it serves more people better in the long run.
Why are you trying to change people's perception of you when you can just change who you are and let their perceptions catch up? The only way you're going to change your reputation is by being different. He's like, you need to stop being this person that does all these things, and your reputation will catch up. And even if it doesn't, you'll always know. Honestly, it barely scratched the surface because my ego was so high, and I was like, no, I just have to think of a better way to like market myself. But I ended up knowing that he was very serious about the threat of pulling me out of school if I didn't get my grades up. And so what I ended up doing for the next half of the semester of my first semester of freshman year is I didn't go out at all. I didn't drink anymore. I really didn't like hang out with girls at all. And all I did was study. And I was able to pull it might have been 1.2. It was very low, up to a 3.2. for the semester, which basically meant I got an A on everything from that point for the rest of the semester. And so when I went back home, he was like, well, now you know you can do it. And so we should always expect that that is what you're going to get from here on out. And it also kind of proved it to myself too. I was like, I guess I can do this. And you know what happened is after I started switching that way, people still thought of me as a whore. And I still had to deal with that. It took like 2 years to really reverse the reputation that I had acquired in the first 3 months. I think during that period of time, I grew an appreciation for how easy it is, especially in first impressions, to set the wrong one, and how hard it is to overcome a negative impression. And my reputation overall, the realization I had was there's too many people that you're interacting with in the world to try and curate reputation. The only way to change your reputation is to change who you are. Reputation is fundamentally just what people say about you, to your face and behind your back. I'm not saying that you need to care about what everyone else thinks. That's not really the point of this. It's much more, if one person says you're an asshole, whatever. If every person you know says you're an asshole, like, you might be an asshole. And so if you have one of those situations where you feel like the proof or the evidence is overwhelming and you might even believe it, then it's probably you. I think that for me, getting out of the whole, like, I can control this and try and curate what people think about me, and transitioning to be like, at the end of the day, I'm the only person who knows who I am and I don't like who I am. And just saying like, well, how can I get to a point where I would like me? Even if everyone else hated me, how can I like me? When I started operating from that place, it really changed my life, because then I started thinking like, what version of me do I want to be? And what does that guy do? Well, that guy studies really hard, and that guy works out really hard. And that guy's a really good friend. He's always respectful, doesn't have an ego. And it took me a long time, and I still work on that stuff. You know what I mean? I'm not saying I'm done by any stretch of the imagination. But I think that if you can simply shift the perspective of like, I'm going to try and appear this way, to like, I want to be this way. If it just so happens to get captured, great. And if it doesn't, great. And there's this quote by Epictetus that I'm probably going to butcher, but he says, if you need someone else to tell you something about yourself, you are out of integrity, because you can always be your own witness. I think that that's a great point to wrap this little video lesson up with, because that piece strikes to the core of everything, which is we are our own witnesses. And if we want to change our reputation, we need to change our reputation with ourselves first. And then eventually it will reflect in the world.
We think that for some reason we are doing something wrong when we are not self-caring, because it is bad to not self-care, because we should, we must, or else, or what? And the reason this pisses me off, the reason that I made a tweet that went viral this morning about this, is that weekends are new for humans. They're not even 100 years old. 1929 in England is when the first weekend got passed by a union. And it's because people hated what they were doing for their life. And so if you want to truly give self-care, then stop hating what you do every day. Novel concept, I know. Stop hanging out with people that f***ing suck. Mind-blowing, like I said, I know. And the reason that I am so passionate about this is that I have been told throughout my entire life that I was working too much, I was not balancing the things that I was supposed to be balancing. And you know what? Who gives a shit? It's my life. I don't need to live by anyone else's rules, and neither do you, right? And so when people say you should be doing this, you are not doing X, Y, Z, just take a pause and be like, are these rules that I want to listen to? Are those your rules that you're trying to apply to my life? Because there are no rules. You can do whatever the hell you want. If you want to work for a year straight, work for a year straight. And the reason you can work for a year straight is because you like what you do. The reason these people try and project their own self-hatred for their own lives onto you is because they cannot imagine a world in which someone might actually like what they do every day and don't need an escape, a break from what their existence is on a daily basis. And so don't feel guilty for just being you. And if you don't like your life every day, rather than try and figure out and make time for self-care, it would probably be better to flip the ratio and start thinking, what can I do in my actual life to stop hating it so much that I need an escape from it, right? And that's different from like, yes, you need to sleep, yes, you need to, rest, etc. But there's a difference between that and like, I just need a total spa day. And if that's how you relax, cool. But the thing is projecting on someone else how they should, must, need to, have to relax or do whatever, it's nonsensical. It doesn't exist. right? I wanted to make this video, even though it's short, because it just drives me bananas. If you want to work, work. If you want to take off, take off. Just don't listen to what anyone else says about what you should do for your life. You're going to die and so will they. And it's not going to matter. And in 10 generations, don't even remember your name. So do what you want. You're going to die. And that is the ultimate freedom. And for some reason, we live under these chains that we think exist, but don't. And so I think the process of growing and really making ourselves free is just simply identifying the things that don't really exist and only existed in our mind to begin with. And I think that's why self-care really bugs the shit out of me, or this whole self-care movement. It's also soft as f***. Like, just work, right? Just get it done. You need to like give yourself a bubble bath every day because like your work's so hard. Like, humans have been here a very long time. We've dealt with much, much harder shit. Your, boss having a deadline the next day is not the worst that you've been through. And so as a final sign off on this, think about the hardest things that you've been through in your life. Everyone has gone through hardship. Everyone has had difficulties in childhood. Everyone has had difficulties with siblings, with parents, blah, 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 these events that shape our lives. You have been through harder shit than this. You will survive. It will be okay. You don't need to self-care. You don't need to listen to what anyone else is saying. You do you. And if that means self-care, by all means, but just don't project it on anyone else.
I think that the whole ego death concept that we were talking about at the very beginning, I try not to talk about this too much because I think it's a lot of people take offense to it, and I don't mean it that way. I share this as just what worked for me and not as a criticism of anyone else's beliefs. For me, the idea that there was no such thing as legacy, that when I died, eventually everything that I had would become dust, and that anything expanded over a long enough time horizon disappears, right? Which if you are like Christian, for example, it's the whole book of Ecclesiastes. And I think the realization of that allowed me to quiet my ego a lot, so that I could be more present in the idea that like this moment will only be here in my mind, and anything that I do here will not last. And so it shifted how I worked. It shifted how I saw relationships. And a lot of my thinking is around like my 85-year-old self. I feel like my number one mentor is like my fictitious 85-year-old self, because it's the only person that I really believe has my best interest at heart and has no ulterior motive. And so there's this tweet that I had that went pretty viral, but it was like listening to a billionaire or a millionaire, I'll just use that. Like, when I was in my 20s, I wanted to be a millionaire. And when I was a millionaire, I wanted to be in my 20s. And so the idea that my future self would trade all the money he had to be poor in 20 again made me really reanalyze how I saw living life in the moment. If I literally in the future will value my present moment more than the achievement of the thing that I'm seeking right now in the present, then something's off. Because even my future self knows that. Because right now I would pay all the money I have to get 10 years back.
Isn't that
without even
interesting?
thinking about it. And so then all of what I'm going to achieve in the next 10 years, I would happily give up to be right where I am right now. And so I think thinking about that really shifted a lot for me, because it helped me quiet, I'm not saying eliminate, but quiet some of the thoughts that are more ego driven, because the ego always wants to like separate and isolate from others and prove that it's better. And if I know that it will all be dust, there is no better, because we're all going to be dust. And so in that same way, if we're all going to be dust and we're all siblings, like two very strong frames, for me at least, it helped me quiet that aspect. And I think in that way, I was able, you can ask my people, but like I think I was able to show up better as a leader. I think I was able to show up better as a husband, show up better like to make content, things like that. Like I don't think I could have made the stuff we make now 5 years ago, because I still think it would have been too
Proving something.
Yes,
right?
it was perfect.
Numbers, proving.
100% have been proving a fictitious foe wrong. Right. They're all talking about me. It's
Right. No one cares about you.
No, exactly. And so that was really, and it's like I had to shift from like no one cares about you to like, I really want to have a shirt that says "No Lives Matter," but I feel like it would get way too.
No one cares about you.
But I think there's like a lot of like meat to that, where it's like if we can, because in that way we are all equal, and so I think it's almost the most egalitarian perspective, is that like in the end we will all be dust. And so I think in that way that's like we have these exchanges that we have, and in some ways it makes it more beautiful.
I say this because all of us, right? I do this all the time.
right? And this is going to be a repeated theme because it needs to be repeated, right? We need to be reminded more than we need to be taught. That is a saying that we have in my world, and I will pass it on to you guys, Mozi Nation. We need to be reminded more than we need to be taught. Do the boring work, repeat successful actions. And so if he's gotten to this point, or if you've gotten to a point in your business and it has plateaued, the question is, has it plateaued because this is true? Like the only reason a business should plateau that is reasonable, that is not your fault, is that you have reached the total addressable market, as in you have saturated the total market of that thing. So for example, if you were selling dog food and every dog within this, maybe you sell a specific type of niche of poodle food, right? You've gotten, 70% of poodle owners to buy your food and you can't grow any more beyond that. Right? Well, that would be reasonable, but then you'd obviously just do a different type of dog, right? You'd hop verticals, right? So there's not even a reason, but it would be the only potentially rational reason would be that your market has changed. So a different example is a friend of mine owns a company that does newspaper advertising. All right, so they actually help newspapers translate their advertisements into digital products, which is pretty cool. So they are able to sell basically a whole new ad product to small businesses who want to buy ads, right? Which is, by the way, how newspapers make money. He could not grow his business because newspapers have shrunk by 25% year over year, which is 25% compounding the wrong direction. And he's been in that business for like 10 years. So now the market size is literally 5% of what it used to be 10 years ago. And so as a result of that, he was growing at an inverse rate to the shrinkage of the industry, right? And so he got to a point where he couldn't grow any more than just basically servicing the ones that are still alive. And then as they fell, so did his business, right? And so that is the only logical reason that a business can plateau that is not in your control. And unless you're selling to newspapers, which you're probably not, the reason is much simpler, which is you just don't know how. And I'll tell you a different story that I had, and then I'll wrap this up at the end. So I was having a different conversation with a woman who was doing, I think, $4 million a year. And she was selling info products that were weight loss. So like weight loss info products. So like programs and ebooks and things like that, which is cool, right? She has a big following, all that kind of stuff. And I did a podcast with her, and after we got off the podcast, she was like, yeah, so these are my plans. I'm going to be doing an apparel line and a supplement line and a cream line and a whatever, right? And I just kind of sat there and I was like, well, I think it's a terrible idea. She was like, she just looked at me across there. She's like, what? And I was like, yeah, I think it's a terrible idea. And she was like, oh. And I was like, why don't you just take the thing that's making you $4 million and make you $10 million? Why don't you do that? And the answer is the same as the first answer. I just don't know how. And I was like, right, well, why don't we solve that problem and then not create a new business? Why don't we just put all of our effort into solving that problem? And so I'm a big believer, and this is the piece that I want to share with you, Mozi Nation, is that I'm a big believer in the theory of constraints, which means that a system will grow until it is constrained, right? It has a constraint, and then once you remove the constraint, it will continue to grow, right? Until it reaches another constraint. And so most people are always curious, or many people ask me, hey, Alex, how did you achieve, quote, so much in, quote, such little time or at such a young age? And I say all that in quotes because so much could be and young age, whatever. But I'm paraphrasing, all right? And I think that one of the things that we have done well is prioritizing what problems to solve. And that is understanding the prioritization of problems and realizing that there is really only typically one or two things that are constraining our growth. And by definition, there'd really only be one thing that's the constraint until we reach another thing that might be beginning to constrain us, but isn't the true constraint yet. I think that when I started out in business, I heard all these things in the personal development space, like, you should read these affirmations every morning. I never did that. And it was because it felt stupid to me. Now, that being said, there might be some people who've had life-changing results from doing that. But what I did notice is that the stories I would tell myself about myself were the things that changed my beliefs. They were the things that changed my character. And so a lot of times in some of my other videos, I've talked about how entrepreneurship is about three things. It's about changing the beliefs that you have. It's about increasing the skill set that you have. And then the character traits that go along with that to make sure the skills are successful. So I'll give you a simple example for this. So a friend of mine, he started a fitness app. It was doing about $20,000 a month. He was a CrossFit Games competitor, but he was really ashamed because he wasn't the winner. He was like, really, really highly ranked one, but he wasn't the winner. And so he believed that his app wasn't good enough, and so he never promoted it. So it grew to $20,000 a month in revenue with him doing zero promotion. And when he realized that
that it was okay for him to promote it and people got a lot of value from it and the app was good enough. He went from $20,000 a month to like $150,000 a month, like that. And the difference was his beliefs. His skills were the same, his character traits are the same, he changed his beliefs. So let me give you a different example. When I actually started out getting in my own business, I had a chain of gyms, this is 10 years ago, I had a chain of gyms. I knew how to run sales teams, I knew how to generate leads, I knew to do all these things, but what ended up happening was I had one missing piece, which was also a belief. Darn, I was actually trying to give you a different one. But I had a mentor come in and say, you need to get in the licensing business, you need to license this model to lots of people rather than doing the actual model yourself. And so I did make that transition, and then we went from $2 or $3 million to doing 7, and the next year we did 28 million. So the year that we made the transition halfway through is what jumped us from 2 or 3 to 7, and it was just in the last like 4 months that we saw this crazy growth, and then we did 28 million the next year. And so it was because I had all these skills, and I also had the character traits. I just needed again to change some of the beliefs. I was trying to give you an example with the character traits. Let me think of one. So if you have, for example, if I had those skills, but I didn't have the character traits of being disciplined and being focused on one thing, I would have jumped between multiple, entrepreneurial endeavors and never been able to see success, because even though I had the beliefs about what was possible, like if I had said, okay, I'm going to do gyms and I'm going to do chiropractors and I'm going to do dentists, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, right? Until I had the character trait of focus, the character trait of discipline, then I would not have seen the success, right? And so the next natural question is, okay, well, if I have to have aligned beliefs, skills, and character traits at each level of the ladder, because you can have, and this is what's crazy, when you see the overnight successes, this is what happens. I want to describe it to you so you understand it and how you can do it. So let's say that there's a ladder, all right, and you've got this pole on one side, you got the pole on the other side, and you've got the middle bar, okay? You need all three to move to the next level of the ladder, right? And so, for example, you might have the left side built up 6 stories above where you're at, and you might have the right side built up 6 stories, 10 stories from where you're at right now. But all of a sudden, if you change your character and that character trait development gives you 3 more rungs, all of a sudden you go 3 rungs because you already have, the constraint has been removed. And so you can be more advanced in your beliefs than you are in your skills. Or you can be more advanced in your character trait than you are in your skills. Or you can be more advanced in your skills than you are in your beliefs, right? And so it's having all 3 of those that are checked off at each level of entrepreneurship that gets you to $1 million a year, $3 million a year, $10 million a year, $100 million a year, whatever it is, right? Is you have to have all of them. And so the point of this video, and is to get you to understand how to actually develop those soft things, because the skills are straightforward, right? The skills are, you just go buy the course and you read the book and you consume the content like this and you practice, you apply, right? That's what you have to do. That's it, right? One of the skills that I see lots of marketers these days not have is they don't know how to sell. They don't know how to develop a sales team. They don't know how to manage and grow a sales team. They don't know how to lead a sales team. That's a skill they don't have. And as soon as they do, they go from 3 million to 10 million like that, very, very easily, right? It's understanding that that's the skill deficit, and as soon as they do it, boom, they blow up. I was fortunate because I had a ton of the skills in my skill toolbox, but I went from making nothing to tons because I had all of these rungs of this ladder already built out to a $30 million level, except I just didn't have the beliefs. That was my issue. Candidly, I suffer from a lot of insecurities, and so my wife was the one who was like, you can do this. Like, you don't have to have these gyms. Like, you can license out the model. Like, you can really succeed like this. And I honestly just thought she was a really smart person and very wise. And so I trusted her belief in me before I really trusted it for myself. And so hopefully you can have somebody like that in your life, but maybe that can be me. I trust in your skills and your beliefs. So hopefully you can borrow some of that trust, because I promise you the world does get better when you take those leaps of faith. I've said this quote many times in our communities and on this channel, which is, you must outwork your self-doubt. Right? If you feel like you are not confident, then you must outwork the things that you're insecure about. If you're like, man, I'm selling these services and I'm not sure if I'm that good at them, then do more of them and don't pretend. Honesty is one of the most compelling and convicting things for persuading people, right? Saying what you are good at and what you are not good at truthfully will win you far more followers and fans and loyal customers and loyal employees than pretending. Because at the end of the day, they can feel that you are disingenuous because they know that it is hollow. They know that on the inside, you do not believe the words that are coming out of your mouth. And that is how people speak without conviction, and they cannot sway others because they have not swayed themselves, because they have lost their own respect. And so I am not the believer in buying the Ferrari when you can't afford it. I am not the believer in affording the home and paying for the home that you cannot afford because you want to pretend like this is the lifestyle that you want to be around. If you go under the guise of networking, you can still go to those places without buying a $4 million house when you're barely making, a few $100,000 a year. It doesn't make sense. I like Jay-Z's quote around this, which is, if you can't buy something twice, don't buy it once. I really like that. And so
This is one of the most common questions I get from newer entrepreneurs because they think that they have to pose on Instagram in order to get wealthy. And what it does is it conflates sequence. Jeff Bezos is famous because of what he did, not because he became famous as Jeff Bezos and then used his following to build something. Elon Musk is famous for what he's accomplished, not for being Elon Musk and then creating something as a result, right? Let the actions be the thing that gives you the fame rather than yourself. Right? At least that is Alex's 2 cents in my viewpoint on the world, and I think most of Mosey Nation, you guys share that belief with me. And for those of you who are new to this channel, you're going to get more of this type of stuff and none of the fake it till you make it nonsense. That is a sure way to be broke. And I will tell you this as a last thing: the amount of people who in 2008, when everything crashed, who were faking it until they quote made it, just faked it until they lost it all. Because they lost what little amount that they had because they were so overextended. But I can tell you that just about everyone can become wealthy if you choose to live on less than you make, right? And that is a ratio. Wealth is a ratio, not a number, all right? And so, anywho, if you are having struggles with this question, I would pause it. I would beg of you that you build your own respect first, that you're honest with yourself first. And if you always maintain the integrity of, hey, last year we got smashed, right? This year we'll do a little bit better. And 2 years from now, when you do even better than that, you can be truthful and people will believe you. But if you always are telling a story about how you're always doing so well, A, everyone will hate you. B, no one cares. And C, you will know that you are full of it. And at the end of the day, I think that is the only thing that we're going to keep with us. And when we die, everyone's going to forget about us anyways. So you might as well at least enjoy yourself while you're alive.
Envy is having the desire for something that someone else has that you do not have. So you're lacking and someone else has something that you want and do not have. That is envy. Jealousy is when you have a threat that someone is going to take something that you have that they do not have. All right. And so, for example, I'll give you an example of each. So envy, I may be envious of a friend of mine. So I was actually talking to a good friend of mine who runs a big weight loss company. And right now he's doing better than I am. And now I am envious of his success. I am. I can feel it. I'm envious. I got off the phone and I was like, I am envious of you. Right. On the flip side, if someone comes to talk to Leila, right, it is the fact that they pose the threat of taking attention or her attention that I think should continuously belong to me that I would feel jealous over. I haven't felt jealousy in a long time, but that is an example. It could also be like with your kids. If you have some other adult in their life starts taking their attention or has more influence over them, you are jealous of the influence that person is threatening your influence over your child, right? So 2 examples, they're nuanced, but I think it's important. And when I was talking to Nick Barely about this, I was talking about how I think envy gets a bad rap. And I'm not going to go into the spiritual religious side of this or even the happiness side of this because I think envy absolutely does not make you happy. But I do think that envy will make you successful. All right. And so this is where I want to kind of dive into this. Envy is adaptive, right? As human beings, this is actually from our old brain, right? So this is animals have this too. They are envious of one another. And it's because if in a group, one person or one being, one animal, whatever, brings more to the table, you are now envious of that person. And what it does is it elevates the rest of the group to go and achieve the same, which is good for the collective. Not happier for each of the individuals, but is a pro-survival tool, right? And so for me, understanding this and at least being able to name the emotion rather than saying, I don't like this guy, or I'm angry at this person, or having this negative feeling that you cannot put words to, instead being able to say, I am envious has been very relieving for me because now I can actually tell those people, hey, I'm envious of you. And for some reason, I think it just creates another level of candor because it's a certain level of vulnerability in saying, you have something that I wish I had, but then you'll notice that the conversation is not defensive on that person's part. Most of the time they're like, well, let me help you. And it's only when we guise our intentions or try and feign, pretend to be a different way than we are, where people also can sense that you're being disingenuous. Like, great job, man, right? When realize deep down, and they can tell from your subtle tonality changes and the way you look that you're actually not happy for them, right? And so I think if you can at least say it, then it actually gives you power. Now, in terms of judging your motivations, because obviously you might think that envy is a bad motivation. it is my belief that I would rather deal with people who do good things for bad reasons than bad reasons for good things. Or I said the same thing twice, but they do the right thing for the wrong reasons rather than the wrong things for the right reason. All right, I'd rather someone who does the right outcome. And he gave me an example that was really powerful. He said a friend of his was a top Navy SEAL, and one of the best Navy SEALs. He trains Navy SEAls, just a total badass, right? And before that, he was an EMT. And he talked about his experiences being an EMT is that most people think, EMTs have to be really caring. You want them to, they have to save these people's lives every day. And he said, the Navy SEAL was saying, I was not compassionate at all. I didn't really care that much about the person who was on the table in front of me. But what I did care about was my stats. I cared about the status of being the best. I wanted to have the fastest to the hospital. I wanted to have the highest survival rates, highest success rates of the people that were under my care because I cared about myself being the best. And so the question is, if you were the person who was on the table having a heart attack, would you rather have the compassionate EMT, or would you rather have the self-interested EMT who is doing it for status? Well, if it were me, I'd rather have the guy who wanted to pride himself on being the best in the world and didn't give and care about me at all, because I knew his result was going to be more pro me than the other person's. And so I think that as humans, as entrepreneurs, we judge ourselves a lot on our motivations and our intentions. But I think that if we can take a step back and name the emotion so that it's not this amorphous thing that we can't understand, but then take the next step and say, is this a pro-adaptive emotion? Is this something that's going to help me? Or is this an emotion that's going to drive me to do something that is negative? And I think at least even in naming that, we can increase the time between emotion and action. And the further that time gap is, in general, the better the quality of the decisions we make, because the more rational we are. We're never completely rational because we're emotion-driven beings and we have limbic systems that override things. But the more we can decrease the triggers, the emotional triggers that cause us to make bad decisions, ultimately the better decisions we make. And so I say all this to say, big picture, first, naming the emotions is important. Second, it creates space so we can make better decisions. Third, we can analyze those decisions and say, is this something that is going to help me in my life, or is this something that's going to hurt me? And then as a result of this, we don't have to judge ourselves as strongly on why we are doing things, and rather what is being done. Because candidly, I am a very envious individual, and maybe this is me just rationalizing my own negative, emotions. Who knows? But at least for me, saying it that way and framing the thought process in that way has helped me feel better about myself, and just less bad, if that's probably a better way of saying it, and not constantly berating myself for having desires that I think are wrong. And so Dan Sullivan said this, and I'll end with this, is that when people want something, if you want to make more money, if you want to have a bigger house, you want to have a bigger car, you want to build a podcast studio, whatever, right? He said, wanting is reason enough. Because so many times we ask, but why do we want that? We're probably not going to change the desire. And so letting ourselves desire things and giving ourselves permission to desire things, and myself specifically, has been incredibly freeing. And what it's done is given me a tremendous amount of my attention back that used to be allocated to analyzing why I'm feeling this way, or why this is right, or why this is wrong, and instead accepting the fact that I want something and that wanting it is okay, as long as it is not something that is hurting other people and that is not something that is hurting me.
Recently, I had some of our older OG gym lords who've been a while. They turn their gym around. They've grown. They're at close to 7 figures or right around there, and they've been doing it for a while. And they were complaining about show rates. They're like, "Hey, our show rates are low." And you go through the saying, "Well, you're doing the reminders. Are you doing all this?" Blah, blah. Yeah, we're doing all this stuff. Okay, cool. And I dig a little bit deeper, and I look, and it turns out that they're only open 1 hour per day at 7:15 a.m. for their availability for new clients. And I'm like, how the do you think that you're going to grow your business if the only time that you can take new customers is at 7:15 a.m.? In what world does that make sense? right? Like imagine a grocery store that's only open from 7 to 7:30 because that's when it's convenient for the owner. What chance do you think that grocery store has at succeeding? Virtually none. And so what happens is people have success. They implement tactics. They use gym watch and then they make money, right? And then what happens? They get comfortable. They get complacent, right? And they lose their hunger. Like after that point, everything, like it's almost like, I was going to say like after you've like quote made it in your mind, and that's what's funny is that making it in some people's mind is like having 10 grand in their bank account. So like it's scary in terms of what level of making it is. But like once people have made it, I almost want to say like none of these tactics matter because you're just not hungry. Like it doesn't matter. Like the obvious shit you aren't doing. You know what I mean? If your child was going to die, or your spouse, or your significant other, your family member, whatever it was going to die, unless you succeeded, unless you got more clients, unless you made more money with your gym, how would you approach it, right? Would you only be available for 1 hour a day? Would you only be available from 7 to 8 a.m.? Would you only set aside an hour a day to prospect for new customers? Would you only reach out to your existing customers if they hadn't shown up for a month? Sometimes people ask questions that they already know the answer to. It's like, duh, no shit, right? And it goes back to the main thing, which is like, what drives you? Right? Like, what drives you? What drives you to be better? What drives you to continue to want to win? I was asked that question yesterday by the gym owners that were here. And I think, honestly, it comes from a dark place. And I think I've said this before, but like, I'm saying it again because I think people need to hear it. Sometimes you have to wonder, like, why is it that only when someone else's life is on the line do you then actually try? Right? Like, why is it only then you actually cut all the noise out of your life and then would go laser focused on actually succeeding? Like, why can't we do that all the time? Right? Like, why can't we do that? Because it's like, well, then I wouldn't be happy. Whatever. Right? And like, whatever happiness means. Right? And so the people who are the most successful in the world are driven by something that is deep inside of them that is normally an insecurity or a fear of some sort. If you're only trying to make enough to live on, you will always only make enough to live on. And you will slack the moment you get comfortable. And you will wonder, why is it that as soon as I start making money, I stop? Because you actually don't want to make more. That's why. You actually don't want to make more. And so your internal motivation is not there, like, because you've accomplished what you set out to accomplish. The real question is, do you actually want what you claim to want? Do you actually want it? Because if you did, you'd already have it. You'd already be willing to sacrifice other things in order to achieve it. And that might mean like maybe waking up earlier, maybe like working 4 to 8 p.m. to take sales appointments, or whatever that thing is. It's just the obvious shit. Like if you were coaching you, what would you recommend you to do? Right? Like a lot of times if you think about it, like you most of the time know what to do. Like you do on some level. Like you probably know that you're like, man, I do stupid shit sometimes, right? You probably think that on some level sometimes, right? Then you're like, man, if you could step out of yourself and say, I need to coach myself, you probably have the answer. And it's just that you don't do it for some reason. And so all of your attention should be on that reason. Why is it that this thing is preventing me from doing the things that I already know I should do?
Most people, most champions do not have something that you do not have. They lack something that you have. Or a champion in the physical realm, a lot of times they don't have an off switch. They just keep going. You have an off switch. Their lack of it, which is what drives their success. And so to the same degree, you probably do things every single day that you should not be doing. And so what I want to introduce to you is a concept of the anti-routine as the most productive routine that is humanly possible for you to accomplish what you want. So number one is obviously just shifting the perspective of I need to do more things and I need to add more things to my routine, when in fact you need to stop doing things that you're currently doing. All that remains is the work to be done. And then you become very clear about why you are not being effective. So number one is that priorities mean two things cannot be equally important. And here's the mentally challenging thing about this, is that when you work on something, and let's say I spend 30 minutes on this thing and I spend 30 minutes on item B. If I spend 30 minutes on both things and I say this one's more important than this one, I can say that, but that's not reality because I basically just said they were both important, which means neither of them are, which is why most people cannot get done, because they cannot say no. A lot of people don't need new things to add to the routine. You need to have a routine of saying no, an anti-routine, and that is the thing that's going to yield those outsized returns on productivity. You can't say yes to everything, and therefore it means that you can't do two things with different levels of importance. It's either important or it's not important. If it's important, it means you say no to everything else. So if you say this is the priority, then it means you do not do other things besides that thing. That is how it is a priority. That is how you literally prioritize.
What it was setting the tone. And the reason that my views on business have dramatically shifted is that I have always had a tendency to lean towards strategy, acquisition, monetization, pricing structures, and all of that stuff is important. But I think within a business, there are two components to it. You've got the smarts and you've got the hearts. And you have to have both. And I think that most people overestimate the importance of smarts, myself included. And I think that there's a lot to do with the hearts, because business strategy overarchingly is not that complex. But like, you really think about it, right? It's like, you got to find something that's good, that people want, and you sell it for a lot more than it costs you to do it. And you do as much of that as you possibly can. Like, that's kind of the idea, right? And the thing is it gets lost in the execution. It gets lost in the doing, right? As soon as you hire your first employees, you're like, no, employees can't do what I can do. It's like, well, that's a horrible belief. You should probably change that before you try and move forward. That's a limiting belief, right? If you want to have a big business. And so when I think about this from a cultural standpoint, and this is what has shifted for me, is that it's become so much more about the soft skills. It's so much more about coaching and developing the leaders of the company. It's so much more about addressing behavioral dynamics of someone that are limiting them, more so than it is about tinkering. And I can't help but think that so many entrepreneurs, myself included, I spent so much time tinkering and tweaking things. What if we change this in our sales process? What if we change this on this page? What if we change the offer like this? What if we change this on the pricing? What if we change the payment terms? Blah, 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 blah. All these different things, right? And think about this for a second for yourself. How many things have you tinkered with in your business over the last however many years, how many months, and your business hasn't changed at all, right? Because the real problem is not the strategy. The problem is not the smarts, right? The problem is the heart, right? The people are not doing what you want them to do because they don't understand why they need to do it and why it's important, right? And that's the soft stuff. And you've got, people who don't want to talk to each other because they don't like each other, because one guy's really annoying. And so it's like, it would better serve you to fix that problem than to try and come up with some new strategy, right? Realizing that has been one of the biggest breakthroughs that I've had in my career. Those two stories should illustrate the difference between having a championship mentality and having a loser mentality, and what might be going on in your business. And I'll leave you with one more story really quickly. So if any of you has ever been on a championship team, right? If you've ever played in a sports arena or whatever, and you've been on a winning team, you've been on a losing team, right? And you've probably been on a losing team that had a lot of good players, but you guys were not connected, you weren't concerted, you weren't aligned, right? On the flip side, you had a winning team, and it was like everyone showed up to practice, everyone, tried their hardest. It was the effort and the consistency and the alignment of the team that accomplished the goal. The rules are the same. Everyone was trying to do the exact same thing. And so when you think about the entire business landscape, right? Your competitors have access, more or less, to the same talent pool that you do. They can see what your strategy is overall, and most people are not that dumb, right? And so as long as you have a relatively sound strategy, like you're not selling things at a loss, right? Then the difference between the two is going to be your ability to execute and have people execute on your behalf. And so that's going to become like, for us as CEOs, we do shift towards becoming championship team coaches, which is why John Wooden, if he had run a business, would have had a championship business, because he focused on the fundamentals. And one of my favorite sayings of all time is, advanced people never don't do the basics. Advanced people never don't do the basics. I would go to these stages and I would watch guys get on stage, and they'd say, we follow up with all of our leads, within 5 minutes. When we get on sales calls, we always ask them why they're there. We label them a problem. We overview some of the past things they've done, and then they follow a clear framework. And then as soon as someone buys, we have a good onboarding process, and nothing they say is revolutionary. It's just that they actually do it, and the people are actually on their behalf. They're not the Vince, or don't have a manager like Vince, who's telling them that they shouldn't have to do that work, right? Who's sabotaging the business. What they did is they set the tone, and then they carry the bar. And so their job is to be intolerant of anything but excellence, and to reinforce that in the culture so that it's consistently executed across the company. Because that, between two companies with the same strategy, will make the difference between somebody who yields disproportionate returns on advertising, crazy profits, good growth, great retention on employees, low turnover, from a company that doesn't have that, right? Even though they both have the same strategy, or even if the smaller company has the better strategy, this guy will win. And this has been one of the most profound shifts that I've had In a perfect world, if everyone had absolute information and everyone was unbelievably well trained and you had a great infrastructure and all that stuff, then yes, the more products and services you offer, in theory, you would make more money. But we don't live in that theoretical world most of the time, and most small business owners are not that good at operating, right? It's the number one issue they have. They're super disorganized. They feel like they're spinning their wheels all day. Their team completely has no idea which way they're going. They change things all the time, etc. And so in an effort to combat that, we have used this process over and over again, and it has worked very well. So it is as follows. We sell two things, and I've done this in virtually every business that I've ever owned. We sell two things. 2 products or 2 services, and this is once we're going from 1 to 10 million. All right, 0 to 1 million, you sell 1 product, 1 service, 1 avatar. All right, that's it. 1 channel, 1 product, 1 avatar. That's it. All right, but once you're going from 1 to 3-ish million, and you're trying to go to 10, you introduce the second product line. And so here's how this works. If you have 2 things that you sell, you'll have a front end thing and you'll have a back end thing. We can still have a massive accommodation in the buying curve based on the payment terms that we introduce. So for example, people will look at their monthly expense more than the total contract value. That's a huge money hack. I'm giving you right now. This is a wealth hack. This is something that will make you a fortune in your life if you can properly understand this. People do not look at the length or the total contract they're signing. They will only pay attention to what is it going to cost me every month, because no one is good with their money. All right, so they only look at the cash flow expense month over month over month, and they just think, can I make it happen? Yes, cool, I'll sign. They don't think about the total contract value. For you as a business owner, the contract value matters almost more than anything. So I'll give you a quick hack on this. Total side note, tangent for you, life hack. Pro tip, if you want to extend the contract value that you have, I have a saying, which is the bigger the head, the longer the tail, all right? And so what that means is the more you can get someone to pay up front, and relative to the upfront cost of signing up or what they paid down, the lower their contractual recurring payment is, the stickier it will be. So I'll give you an example. If I had someone sign up for $99 a month for whatever, it doesn't matter, that price point might be medium sticky depending on the value that I have. Now imagine I had someone pay $5,000 down and $99 a month after that. How much more sticky would it be? Significantly more sticky. Now, the beauty is if you have one of these upfront type payments, you can also use that to liquidate your ad costs, cover your commissions for the salesperson, cover the upfront fulfillment and onboarding, which is going to cost more for a new customer than an existing customer. And so you can build all that in. If you know that the thing that you are selling has very high gross margins, then you can still have a lower cost as long as you know that the person is going to stay for a long time. And so based on how you structure the pricing, you can actually you can use the pricing to actually get people to stick longer. Pro tip complete. That is it. Moving back to the original thing that I was talking about. In one of our portfolio companies, we actually had this as a really in-depth discussion that we had to make a decision about, all right? And so they had a different, mentor, person, whatever, advice, who told them that they should have 3 products. And they should have a low, a medium, and a high product. And then based on what the salesman thought, the salesman would sell them the low, medium, or high. In my experience, it is not that effective. And that is because the salesperson can't decide which of these things they're trying to sell most of the time. And so what we have found is more effective is you give the salesperson the one dream to sell. This thing is going to solve this person's problem, and we make it the most valuable thing that we're trying to sell, because at the end of the day, you do want to solve the customer's problem, right? We do want to actually make sure that we're providing value. Rather than having a diet, a medium, and a great, right? Simply having one thing that solves all the problems, and then based on the customer's budget, we can decrease how they pay, all right? So hear me out. So let's say that we want to do this is a 6-month implementation of whatever kind of solution you sell. If you have a 6-month duration, you can have the person A, pay the entire thing up front. So that would be for somebody who has the highest budget. Version 2 would be a split pay. Version 3 might be 3 payments, right, at 20% higher. And then finally, you might have a 6 pay or whatever over that period of time. So 1, 2, 3, 6. Now, here's the cool thing. The more payment options you provide, the higher your conversions are. That's proven, all right? So the more options you give someone to pay, the more people will buy, period. Now, you might not make more cash flow, because if you give your sales guy more options, then they'll end up defaulting to the lower ones, right? But If you have one thing to sell, then they only have one thing to convince the person of, because a confused mind doesn't buy. If you have too many options, the salesman won't know what to sell and the prospect won't know what to buy. And so I prefer, when I'm coming into a portfolio company, I'm thinking, what is this true problem that we are solving with this business? For what avatar? And we make that the main thing, and we communicate it clearly in the scripting, and the salesperson has clarity on what they are selling, and they're always solving the same thing. And so the question becomes no longer which of these things are you going to buy, but once you are buying, how would you like to pay? And so then the discussion is around what payment plan is best for them rather than what product is best for them. And so by doing that, you can get people to go between different payment terms. That is not going to change whether they're going to buy. But if they're unsure about which product is going to best suit their needs, and the salesman doesn't know, because at the end of the day, he's just trying to sell the most expensive thing, then you'll have way more confused people who leave unsold. So this is a single tactic that you can use to execute within your business, which is why I'm a big fan of making offers people cannot say no to, is that you can focus all of your sales and all of your persuasion attempts on selling the one thing, which is getting them to say yes. Once they say yes, we can accommodate their wealth and their budget based on the payment terms that we provide. And if we have structured our offer properly, the offer in and of itself should already be very high gross margins, which means whether or not the person pays $1,000 a month or $100 a month, it's still almost all margin for us because of how we structure the thing that we are selling. And so we are able to capture higher LTVs by getting the people who have more money to prepay the thing up front. That is how we do it. And with those people, you'll be able to ascend into the second thing faster because they've already prepaid that thing. And then you can solve the next natural problem in another sales conversation rather than trying to pick all of the things in one conversation, which makes it incredibly difficult to do. This is, just for everyone, again, a broad brushstroke of statements for most entrepreneurs who are not very good at operating their businesses, or operations is not their strong suit, and are below $3 million a year.
Because you made it this far in a video, I want to celebrate you. Most people start and don't finish. Most people never actually follow through. Most people say they want something, but they don't ever do the work to actually get it. But you are different. You are special. Believe Nation, you made it here all the way to the end, and I love you. So as a special celebration, if you put a hashtag believe down in the comments below on this video, I will showcase you and celebrate you somewhere on the screen in a future video because you are awesome. For 10 more amazing rules from Gary Vaynerchuk, check the video right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
And know that I have a problem in my 300-person Singapore office, or something happened in LA, or one of the other 17 businesses that I'm associated with are in trouble. I sit on top of almost 3,000 employees and 2 very large